You're live.
Thank you. We'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. And at this time, I'd appreciate a quorum call and for attendance, if you would proceed with that, Rachel.
Good morning. Thank you so very much. So we'll start with you. Chair Rich Balducci.
Here.
Regent Gray Kemp. Since noted. Regent Santiago.
Here.
And thank you very much. I'll turn it right back over to you, Chair Balducci. I believe we have a quorum with our Finance Committee members.
Yes, we do.
Finger in the air.
You forgot our other member, the indisputable Dr. Blitz.
In attendance, present.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Professor Blitz. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I would make a motion to approve the previous Finance Committee minute meetings. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ari. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Minutes are adopted. The next is an information item which is of importance, and we're going to turn that over to Ben to go over discussing possible changes in tuition and fee for the next fiscal year.
Thank you, Chairman Balducci. We put this on the agenda today as an information item because we wanted to give you some advance warning and an opportunity to discuss our proposal that we consider our tuition and fees for the universities this fall rather than waiting until next spring. Traditionally, we've done tuition and fee establishment in February or March, depending on how the year goes, hoping at that, typically that was driven by our expectation that by the second or third month in the new calendar year, we'll have an idea about the likelihood and the likely levels of state financial assistance that we would have to support operations, and then use that information to establish tuition. One of the problems that has developed, one of the downsides of doing it that way, particularly for the universities, is that it prevents the universities from having an established tuition schedule and fee levels, which means that everybody who they admit and package from a financial aid perspective needs to be repackaged. And they're also unable to make a firm commitment as to what the out-of-pocket cost for students who apply early would be. So the enrollment window opens with the FAFSA goes up on October 1st, and October, November, December are periods in which we would like to be able to generate enrollment activity, and the lack of final resolution of tuition and fees is an obstacle for the admissions staff at the universities in particular. This is a little less of an issue with the community colleges because their enrollment tends to happen later, although it is an issue for them. Their enrollment window also opens up with the FAFSA coming online, and in all cases, the enrollment challenges that we face across the system demand us to, use every available month to try to drive our enrollment at each campus. So we have elected this year we're proposing to advance the decision about tuition and fees for next year, the year that starts essentially a year from now. And we are proposing to do that in the October board cycle for the universities. The community colleges have asked for, would like to do it early, but because of other issues around the merger, have asked that we give them some more time. So we would likely bring the community college tuition before the board in the December cycle. There's not a November meeting, so the December cycle is a little earlier in the month. So they would still have their tuition and fees established before the end of the year in order to have that, to give them that as a tool for for their recruitment activities starting at the, essentially over the holidays. So Charter Oak is really very different. Their market is very different, and they've asked that we defer their tuition establishment until early in the calendar year, largely so that they can react to and price themselves relative to their significant online competition. So they would like to know essentially what Southern New Hampshire and Western Governors and all their online competitors are doing, simply because it's such a price competitive environment in the all online education. They want to make sure that they have good market information. They don't believe that that hurts their enrollment. So this year we're proposing to bring you the universities in October, the community colleges in December, and the Charter Oak will go in February as normal, with sort of the normal time period that we've used in the past. I think that this is a better arrangement from an enrollment perspective, unquestionably. We do lose some information about the level of state aid, but the truth is that we never have really very good information in February or March anyways. We'll have typically the governor's budget recommendation, but that's not necessarily where we end up. So while we might reduce our uncertainty by waiting, we'll still have enough uncertainty that we think it doesn't justify waiting, the extra 3 or 4 months because of the harm that does to our enrollment efforts. The last point I'll make is that, and we'll get to this when you see the baseline budget proposal that we're making to OPM, we are facing very difficult financial circumstances next year as a result of the large amount of one-time revenue we received in the current year and last year. I don't want to say that tuition isn't important, because it is very important. It's an important expense for students. It's an important source of revenue for us. However, the traditional model where you look at all your other revenues and look at your enrollment and look at your expenses and decide how high tuition needs to be in order to make the budget work, sort of the mill rate setting model that I think of, that's kind of out the window this year. There's no way we can raise tuition enough to balance our budget on the backs of students next year. The challenges that we face in our baseline budget will be resolved with obviously a combination of things, and tuition will impact it, but not nearly as much as state aid decisions and whatever programmatic and expenditure changes the universities elect to implement. So I think from a decision-making standpoint for the board, the question about tuition really is a question of what level of increase can we implement while not harming students, based on availability of financial aid, based on the competitive, the array of tuition and fee levels at competitive institutions to us, and also I think just a general strategy of how important is it that we maintain low sticker price, et cetera. So I think that the decision, the information that we will need to make the decision is available to us in October, even though we won't necessarily know what the governor's budget proposal looks like. I'm not sure that would really give us enough information to make the decision that much easier. It will still be a difficult call. So that's the situation we're in, and I wanted to just give you a heads up. If anybody has any thoughts about that proposed new schedule, we will try to accommodate. Yes.
Any comments by members?
Yes, sorry, I
All
threw
right.
my hand up. What can we do, Ben, to help? There's a lot of information there, but in the summary, I sort of understand the sticky wicket that we're in. It sounds like there aren't really many good options here. What can we do to help? And we're presenting a budget here. Do we have view of what we're going to do to get in balance?
Well, yeah. Obviously, I'll talk a little bit about that too. Although there's an action item on that coming up. the way the budget process works, typically on September 1st, and we did generally comply with that, we submit to the state budget office they call it a current services budget. It's a baseline budget. It's a budget that assumes, the current practices and current laws and no change in, normal funding levels. And that's what that's on the agenda here. We ask the board to approve that every year, or every 2 years when we submit this biennial budget request to the governor. That identifies a significant hole. And we talked through some of the details of that. And those problems are at the universities and at the college as well. And this is a fundamental problem. We have, in addition to moving the tuition setting process earlier, which we hope will facilitate a variety of actions at the campus level around enrollment management that will be beneficial. We're trying to support them, rolling out whatever initiatives they think will generate more student enrollment. We're also, though, have asked the campuses to provide us with specific budget options preliminarily. I mean, we haven't decided to do any of these things, but we've taken the information that you have in your packet about our baseline budget challenge and asked each institution, the 4 universities and the college and Charter Oak, to provide us by the end of September with some specific options that would reduce expenses or increase revenue in order to bring us to balance, so that we can at least internally and then eventually at the board level approve a series of actions that would, or at least begin to develop fully fleshed out actions that we can implement that will bring the budget into balance. Now, we've done this over a 2-year period, so 3 years counting the current year, in large part because we recognize that many of the kinds of changes that an academic institution might make take a long time to carry out. So if you're going to, if you believe that adding a new program in, metaphysics is going to, bring in the students and drive enrollment for the next 20 years, and you have a plan to implement that, it takes several years to actually develop that program and get it up to full enrollment. Especially, in a 4-year program, it takes at least 4 years and probably more than that to fully build out a program to its ultimate enrollment levels. So, and similarly, if you make reductions, if you merge departments or you eliminate a degree program that you don't think is performing well, those things take a period of time as you identify how to handle the currently enrolled students, et cetera. So that's one of the reasons that we've taken an approach of asking for options over a multi-year period so that we can take a look at what the best course of action is going to be. I don't know, ultimately we're not going to be able to make some of these, there's a reason we adopt our budget in June, because by the time we actually have to adopt it, we want to have really very good information about what the state's doing, what our enrollment looks like, et cetera. But knowing how difficult it is to develop actionable steps we can take to reduce spending or increase revenue, that those take planning and execution, et cetera, we're beginning that process now. I suspect that some of those options are going to be deemed desirable, and they're going to begin work on them now. So if we want to start the metaphysics program, and we've got to start recruiting for faculty, if we think that that's the right program for us to implement to solve our budget problems or some piece of it, we're going to be in a position to have the leadership of each institution, with our support from the system, identifying those options this fall for action, before we get to budget adoption all the way at the end of the academic year. We're trying to give ourselves a little bit more time to implement these things that come out of this process. So that's our strategy. I can't tell you exactly what those items are. We're working with each of the campuses to develop those. I think it's a frustrating process for them because, you know, these are all very difficult changes that they might consider. But I think you know, my conversations with the university financial leadership and a couple of the presidents suggest that they have, you know, they're working on it. They have some ideas and they have some things that they are, you know, beginning to, you know, put out there and you know, sharpen their pencils and do some cost estimating and revenue estimating and projecting out, and we'll use those options that are developed to generate to support the campuses developing their own plans going forward.
You know, Ari, you mentioned one of the things, what we can do. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. That's where I was going to head back to. Yep.
Okay, one of the things we can do is, you know, we can increase somehow, our biggest problem is enrollment. And we need to increase enrollment at the colleges and universities. To add to that issue, we also have to see if we can increase room and board at the universities. We're losing tons of dollars, as you know, over time. One of the things I want to suggest to Ben later on, since we raised tuition and he alluded to it and in a very nice way, but whatever we raise is not going to be enough to cover the ticket at the end of the year. We're going to have to get aid from the state, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we have to make a move in the right direction that way. One of the things I'd like to talk to him about, and we'll be back to you on him after I've had the discussion with him because I haven't yet, I'd like the colleges or the college and the individual university presidents to come up with potential, I want to say cuts, but let's say redirection. 1%, what would happen? Can you do at 1% if we have to cut everybody 1%? At 2%, 3%, and 5%, I'd like to know, or at least each president or head of the college should know what has to be done then, not all of a sudden have it done. And Ben alluded to that already, saying they're going to start in a direction, but I like to do it on a percentage basis because for me, it shows a dollar amount. You cut 1%, it's $1 million. You cut 2%, it's $2 million, whatever in that direction area. And I'd like to see that out there for us so we know what kind of damage, and I use that word because I think much of it could be harmful to students, faculty, and staff as we move. But I think that's a direction I'd like to see us move in as we move toward increasing tuition and fees for the colleges and universities.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that too. I just would, you know, maybe this is more of an offline conversation, but I think I really like the idea of thinking strategically. Where are we going in a direction? What can we do to raise enrollment, engage the community, drive our mission further? Because the more enrollment we have, the more impact we make. You know, not only will it solve some of our problems from an enrollment perspective, but I think it puts us in a better position to look for state support. The more people in the state are leveraging and getting value from our services.
Thank you. David?
Well, thanks. I'll certainly report back to my university that Ben Barnes has proposed the establishment of a Department of Metaphysics. And I'll add to that one of epistemology as well, I think. My question, though, is what about the situation at Western? Is it expected that they go back to a balanced budget within 1 year, given the depth of the problems that they have in the NGEMS report and so forth? And is there any plan to use the system reserves to aid them in any way?
Well, I can certainly speak to that question. The Western does have keen financial challenges next year. So do Southern, and to some degree, so does Eastern, and so does Central. None of the universities is immune from some of the problems that we face. I think Western, the work that we've already done suggests that they have some organizational challenges that they need to address, as well as the just fundamental budget budget challenge that they face. I would say that in terms of the need to provide system reserves to Western, obviously the board has the authority to do that, and there may be a requirement to do it. The last time there was an institution in CSCU that was, had depleted its reserves was, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that at Eastern. And they, this is sort of at the very beginning of Dr. Nunez's tenure. I think when she got there, their net position was negative. They recovered and now have, I'm not going to say the strongest reserves ever. They're not Yale University, but they now have a much more stable financial footprint and are able to, I think, come up with pretty sound ways of weathering the storm that they're in right now. I think they have to do, but they have more resources to protect themselves. However, the board, the system never dipped into, well, I think that was sort of one of the, when they began the process of accumulating system reserves. There was a period when they essentially had each university contribute to some system reserves, which continue there today. I believe in the experience of Eastern was that they went negative on their adjusted net position, and then recovered from that because of the way that we are as a state agency and as a and given the way that we pay for our resources, it is less they can go negative in reserves for a period of time without impacting their cash flow or otherwise jeopardizing their welfare. The only issue really is the accreditation that accreditors look for financial stability and the ability to meet their unexpected challenges if they come up. And I would say that we've been successful recently at pointing in both in the colleges and to some degree in the universities at using system reserves as a, pointing to them and saying, the system has reserves. So if something catastrophic happens at Western while their reserves are depleted, there is some place where we can go to address that problem. But we don't necessarily need to transfer that to the best of my knowledge. Now, circumstances may change, and there may be reasons why we feel we do need to make a transfer of reserves to Western, but I am not envisioning that is going to be necessary in this cycle. I believe that Western has, in some respects, a bit of a leg up over some of their sister institutions in this particular budget cycle, because many of they have undertaken some very severe hiring restrictions and other economization moves over the last 6-9 months that are producing some benefit for them, and those benefits will carry forward into the next budget cycle. So they started, I think, 6 months before, and so I'm hopeful that Western will be able to produce a balanced budget with a similar amount of challenge as their sister institutions, although each one is different. And I suspect when we look at the options that they produce, each institution is going to be charting a different path toward resolution of their financial problems, which is appropriate. There are different institutions, and while we can learn from one another, there are also ways in which I'm sure they will diverge.
Any other comments? Thank you, Ben. That was great. Appreciate that input. The next item we have 3 action items. The first one deals with fiscal 24-5 biennium baseline operating budget and capital budget, which we have to do every 2 years. I'm going to give that over to Ben, and Ben, whatever help or comments you want from others, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. So the staff report in the packet includes summary and also the sort of detailed tables that show our budget circumstance going into this cycle. In total, we project that if we don't do anything, which is obviously not on the table, so it's sort of a counterfactual. But if we don't do anything, we anticipate that we would have a system-wide deficit of about $106 million in fiscal 24 and $115 million in fiscal 25. And that those changes are driven almost entirely by revenue, and to some degree, to some lesser degree, by the additional expense related to the operating fund portion of the CBAC raises. So when we pay the raises that the state negotiated for state employees, we, you know, the way that the universities and colleges operate with two funds, the general fund, which is the state support, and the operating fund, which is all of our, you know, revenue that we produce from students and miscellaneous sources. The operating fund, the general fund resources come with fringe benefits, as you know, and those went up a fair amount. And we are assuming that they will follow historical practice for increasing our general fund budget based on the share of our salary expenses that fall on the general fund. So they picked up in the current year the general fund portion of all those raises, and we anticipate that that will continue. But there's still a portion of those, particularly in the universities, less so in the colleges, which generally have a higher coverage of salaries out of the general fund, particularly in the universities, but all across the system. There is a portion of our of these raises that we have to cover out of tuition under current law. Now, obviously, we're going to propose that that be handled differently going forward, I'm sure, and seek additional state support. But under the current practices, there's an amount of additional expense that we would need to cover. And again, the drop off in the one-time revenue sources. There was a whole bunch of CARES Act money and not CARES Act, I'm sorry, ARPA funds that were provided to us. We anticipate that the total amount of one-time budget funding for the system in our today, in the current year, is $152 million. I'm sorry, well, there's another five, so $157 million of one-time funding this year in our budget. That goes away. Some expenses go away too, like some of the one-time funding was for one-time expenses. There was a 27th payroll, for instance, that we don't have to cover. But the net of those leaves us with a shortfall of about $115 million. That is, I'm sorry, $106 million next year and $115 in the second year. That is split about 60-40, with 60% of that coming from the universities and the remainder coming from the colleges. So we're, you know, we have a big task ahead of us. Bear in mind that our total operating budget, just for comparison, is about $1.5 billion. So this is less than 10%, but still a significant amount of money that's going to require some very thoughtful changes to what we spend it on and also how we generate additional revenue. I want to get back to the point that Chairman Balducci made about, you know, making across-the-board cuts. I know that the universities and the college are very, are keenly interested in avoiding having the Board of Regents implement across-the-board reductions to spending. I think that they, and I agree, believe that that is a last resort, and we should undertake to implement changes to balance our budget in a more planful and thoughtful way than that suggests, and that the desire to cut our way out of these financial problems is while understandable, may not be in the long-term best interest of the institutions. That we are very mindful that we should give the universities and the college an opportunity to provide realistic ways of growing revenue and growing enrollment and growing revenue as a primary means of both balancing our budget and fulfilling our organizational mission. So, I mean, there may be some instances where we have to make cuts, and if there are underperforming programs that are not serving students, I will be the first to recommend that the institutions, move past those programs that are not meeting student needs. But I think back to the discussion earlier, the reason we're asking them to begin the process of identifying how they're going to manage their budget problems now is to give them, or actually about a month ago, they've been sitting on this since in August and have been working on trying to identify how to make their budget work. I think it's very important that they be given an opportunity to identify more proactive ways that they can restore their enrollment. And I'll just say I've had some conversations with the consultants that wrote our original report about Western and who are now writing the sort of fully formed, the second part of that engagement. And I think that they agree that there are many ways in which the challenges that Western faces, and I think all of us face, are not simply that we spend too much money and we should cut our spending. And there may be ways that we can do that, but there are also ways in which we're spending money on programs that may not be best serving students. And if we could change the way we deliver some of our programs, the way we provide student support services, the way we organize our institutions to serve the students we're serving, that we can do that in a way that is more effective to students and also aligns our spending and our revenues better. So we're really trying to find ways to move through this without simply taking out the hatchet. Although I think it is extraordinarily important to remember that at the end of the day, if we can't find a way to balance our budget, we have to live within our means. And that's something that's going to, we will get to that, but we're trying to find more nuanced ways through this mess before we, just decide to, hack a path down the middle using the sharp implements at hand, because that's a tough path too. And so we're really trying to find the right mix there. And the best solution I can have is early engagement with the institutions, and that's ongoing right now.
Thank you. Any other comments about David?
Yeah, I certainly agree that there should be last resort to have across-the-board cuts. And I think the lesson from that $6 million cut last year is really, if the worst-case scenario does arise, that it should not be directed as to particular categories, but the institutions should be, particularly the universities, should be free to determine themselves how to meet a certain budget target, if that has to be the case. The second point I wanted to make, and it's really, you may think it peripheral, and I've made it before, it's not really based on the agenda today, but the interim report on the community colleges lists the 178 advisors who have been hired. And you may recall that when there was a presentation on this, there didn't seem to be any funding for it after FY23. Is that still the case? Because 178 people, that's quite a chunk of wages and benefits.
Well, I don't have is there a funding source identified for any of you could pick 178 of our employees and say, is there a funding source identified for them? And the answer is yes, tuition, fees, state assistance, and other operating revenues. Those are the funding sources that support all of our activities. The outcomes of the Guided Pathways program are early days. We really, to be honest, the Guided Path, we've implemented the advisement, but some of the alignment of curriculum, which is a major part of the Guided Pathways initiative, is not only to have people who show you how to get to your degree, but to make the pathway to your degree a little bit more straightforward and easier to navigate. Those are both sides of this. The curriculum alignment is really coming together this year with the merger of the community college. The other issue, we have some preliminary data around retention efforts at the earliest campuses to implement Guided Pathways, and those are positive, and that they suggest that the retention rates increase, and our our enrollment is better at the institutions that were early adopters. But it's very preliminary, and I'm not sure that we really can firmly draw conclusions about the success of that program at this point. But there's no question it's an issue. I will tell you, there also aren't 178 of them anymore. It's hard work, and people have left, and we've had some turnover. And I know that we've also had significant drops in enrollment. So we've calibrated whether we're refilling all the positions based on the number of student demand. The original group of advisors was determined at a time when our enrollment was 10% higher or 15% higher than it is today. So actually, maybe even more than 20%, quite a bit higher. I'd have to think back exactly which year we set those numbers in. But we are calibrating that, the size of the Guided Pathways program, based on current enrollment as we sit. So I think the number has gone down. I can certainly try and track down the exact number of GPAs we have right now, but I think it's more in the 160 range, just because of turnover that's occurred early in the program. If I can just return, there's one other item in the biennial request. It also includes a capital budget submission. That capital budget submission amounts to, get to the summary page. Amounts to $501 million over the biennium. This is a request for authorization, so the sort of the first part of the process of getting bond funds into projects. There's nothing on this list that is new. Because the progress in funding our capital program has been lower lately than we would hope and than we've experienced in the past. We are continuing each year to just essentially move projects back in the time horizon as we, so many of the projects that are our priorities for them to authorize in 2023 were the same ones that we really wanted them to authorize in 2021, and they didn't. And so we're back again. The Kinney Hall still needs renovations. The other buildings still need the science building at Central still needs renovations. There are a number of projects that have not been funded in the past, and so we continue to refresh our requests for those. Most of the funding, or a major portion of that funding, is in what we call program funding, which is things like infrastructure improvements, technology, equipment replacement. So those are really very critical to us, keeping our substantial infrastructure from becoming unusable and unworkable. So this is the money we use to, fix furnaces. The air conditioning went out, and we got to get it back up and running, and we have to go and buy a, $150,000 chiller unit. This is, it's these program funds that we use for that. Some of it is used most of it is used in a planful way, but we also maintain some flexibility that Keith does to ensure that we can address issues that are late developing.
And this is all part of the $500 million, 501.
Yes. And it makes up about 200 of the $500 million is in program funding. That's obviously been our priority in terms of getting money out of the bond commission and pushing for authorization, simply because, if we have to live with less, we would rather have the most flexible source of money that we can use to, keep all of our infrastructure running, and would prefer to defer some of the larger construction capital projects. I don't think that that's particularly the current level of infrastructure investment that we have at CSU is not sustainable over the long period of time, and we're certainly working to request more. This is the beginning of that process, so I've included in your approval of the biennial budget submission is our 2-year, the first 2 years of our 10-year capital program as it's been updated. Keith is on the call too, if anybody has any questions about any of the specific projects or approaches that we're taking. Happy to turn those over to him.
Any other comments for Keith or for Ben?
David.
Okay, great.
One
Thank you.
one last comment. I'm
Oh.
sorry. And this will be, I promise, my last one. And it has, with respect to page 25 of the agenda today, attachment A, which is the expenditures, the revenue and expenditures for the Board of Regents. And you may recall at a previous meeting, I was somewhat perplexed by the fact that there had been in the weekly job announcements openings for 35 staff at the administrative, management, confidential, and professional level advertised under Board of Regents. And I'm still not quite clear, although maybe Ben, you explained it last time and I've forgotten, how this works, that they're being hired under the aegis of the Board of Regents, but obviously their salaries do not appear in the budget under the Board of Regents. And secondly, related to that, it's just a request for the future. I'd like to see broken out from the, at least for our use here in the committee, broken out for our understanding, the funds which are being apportioned for the system office for the universities, the system office for the community colleges, the new one under planning for New Britain, and also in terms of shared services, what proportion of those dollars are being used for support to community college activities and to university activities?
Sure. Well, I believe that we've been providing that level of detail in the full budget proposal to you, but we did not break it out here. Again, the Board of Regents funds that are shown on page 25 reflect the state appropriation for the Board of Regents and our use of those. Most of the expense that occur, well, first of all, the Board of Regents is the employer, so all of our expenses are, in some respects, by the Board of Regents and at your direction. But this is a specific budget line that is provided for governance activities. Basically, it pays for, a little bit of salary for, for Terrence, essentially, and I think maybe Pam is included there. Most of the expenses at the system office are paid by the university, by either the universities or the colleges through a distribution model that we run every year, in which we decide how much of the block grant goes to each individual institution and how much must be set aside for paying for system office activities. And we can certainly provide that as we get a little deeper into the budget process. The shared services, again, is relatively large. It is almost entirely for the benefit of the colleges now. There are a few examples where that's not true. Keith's work in facilities, there's a fair amount of that is for the benefit of the universities. There is work in the comptroller's office preparing financial statements for the universities. There is occasional other things, but those are the largest areas where we are providing. Well, Ernestine, obviously, legal. I'm sitting here next to Ernestine's office. The legal department also serves the entire organization. So the salaries for those folks, are well, and for instance, I do. So my salary is split between the colleges and the universities as part of their block grant. That's true for, for Alice Pritchard and for Ernestine and many of the senior leaders and much of our staff here at the system office.
Yeah, that was the big one, I think. The idea that shared services became part of it. When you looked at it just as a separate item, it looks differently until you understand that we have those shared services between the colleges and the universities, and they roll over into the faculty and to the staff at the system office.
And I will tell you that we have, with new President Maduco at CT State and all the activity that's going in, and I'll correct you, Professor Blitz, the institution in New Britain, CT State, is well beyond the planning stages. There are, actual people there implementing actual programs at campuses across the state. They are managing the advisement and enrollment management and, technology. Lots and lots of the infrastructure of the community college has been migrated into the CT State organization, which has employees all over the state and in New Britain. New Britain's kind of small. Most of the employees that have been transferred over into CT State or are in process of being transferred are in fact working for CT State while working in an office at Naugatuck Valley or, Middlesex Community College, wherever it is, just because that's where we have office space and that's where we can serve our students. So that question is especially difficult this year. You may recall we simplified our budget a little bit this year, basically because it is so difficult to report on, who's being funded at a campus level and who's being funded at CT State, because we're moving everybody from campus to CT State. They're still going to be at the campus, but their funding source changes and their specific role in the organization may, in some cases, changes a little bit based on the new organization of CT State. So I think that we are in, that progress is moving along pretty well. One of the things that has come out of those discussions, though, is that some of those shared services, we may end up, I think it's convenient now to administer those through the system office. We have the capacity to stand them up, and we are happy to take the lumps from their growing pains. But ultimately, those services, in some cases, may end up reverting back to CT State, and those employees could be transferred back. That's certainly a possibility that we have at any time. Shared services is a convenient way to organize those services, and has been now. It may be in the future, but it may not be in some cases, and we will continue to be flexible and place those resources in the sort of budget and management scheme of the system in the place that makes the most sense at that time. So I anticipate there will be changes to that form as we become one college next July 1, and there may be good reasons to move certain functions back, whether it's human resources or accounting or some of these business office functions, we sort of brought them all to the middle into the shared services. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those moving back into the colleges explicitly, both from a budget and a management perspective.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Any other comments? Hearing none, we'll move along. I would make a motion for adoption of the biannual baseline operating budget. Is there a second?
So moved.
Second?
Oh, second.
Thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. The action item is adopted. The second action item we have is for residential hall policy, which came up and there are concerns about, and I'll turn it over to Ben. I think we'll get a couple of bits of help on that one, Ben.
Yes, absolutely. I would like to introduce and turn this over to my colleague, Angelo Simoni, who is the executive. I'll let him introduce himself because that way I won't bungle his title. But he is the proponent of the change to our policies that's on the agenda today.
Okay, Angelo, you're up.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
So this was brought about originally. This proposed policy actually replaces an older Connecticut State University resolution 06-52 policy related to employment at university residence. This was brought about in terms of the professional housing staff members at the 4 Connecticut State universities having the ability or the option to have a partner, whether married or unmarried, reside with them in their professional capacity in the residence halls. for those of you that might not know, are 6 university campuses employ mostly SWOF, full-time employees that live and work in the university residence halls that provide student services, and they're there either 10-month or on 12-month contracts. Currently speaking, the policy only allows for the married partner or spouse to reside with the university housing staff member. This policy revision will bring alignment with other colleges and universities across the country, including UConn, to allow for the spouse to live with them in addition to a partner who is not currently married, in addition to the dependent children of the university housing staff member. So bring some congruency to the policy, updates it to best practices. This has been in the works for some time, but really what brought it to fruition is our 4 state universities, our housing residential life offices, they are having challenges recruiting and retaining these full-time housing employees, especially since other colleges and universities are allowing partners and pets to live in the residence halls with the employees. So obviously, we allow for service animals in the residence halls and disability accommodations, but this policy will take it a step further and allow for a domesticated pet to reside with the employee as approved by the university. Additionally, in the old policy, it allowed for the university residence halls to be used for housing guests and other visitors like lecturers or visiting faculty at the discretion of the university president that support the educational mission of the university. That is also included in this policy. The definition has been expanded and gives the universities the ability to provide housing for these visiting faculty on a temporary basis as deemed appropriate by university leadership, and has the ability to require fees and other applications to consider that. I think it's important to note that with relation to that, in terms of the visiting faculty or guest lecturers, we're not taking away student housing. So the student at Western Connecticut State University would get priority housing over an external person or faculty member. I think, as Ben alluded to in previous meetings, university residence halls are not at completely 100% occupancy. So this will give the university some flexibility to fill the halls and allow for hopefully some additional revenue. One last point I'll mention is the universities will work with the Office of Legal Affairs General Counsel's office to ensure that the procedures are legally viable, that we're making sure that we're following best practices. And ideally, there'll be one set of procedures with the allotment for some nuances based on individual university operations, so that Eastern is not doing something completely different as opposed to Central and vice versa. So there will be some congruency there to ensure that we're in alignment as a system.
Angelo, a couple of questions quickly, I hope. How many members can be there with the original hiree? Is there a stipulated number? 1, you said children, which to me is plural. So if I am the director of the hall, can I have 3 children living with me in my facility?
It's a great question, Rich. Thank you. So each of the residence halls have designated hall director or residence life apartments. They have different amount of bedrooms. So some are 1 bedroom, some are 3 bedrooms. So generally speaking, we're not putting more than 2 children, dependent children, in the bedroom in the residence halls. So, in the event that, I'm married and, I have a child or dependent with me, and my current apartment living on campus is only 1 bedroom, the housing department at the 4 universities is prepared to make accommodations and visit where folks are living in the event that they need to accommodate a dependent child from, as it relates to a university staff member.
We are providing housing for these individuals, correct?
We
are not for the director and for his spouse or mate or children, etc. Are we also providing meals for them, or is that a separate issue?
We're not providing meals for the spouse, the partner, or the dependent children, only the residential living space.
Okay, and I think my last question deals with liability. I don't know what they do at other universities, but I know if I am the director, I am covered under the policy of the university because I work for the university. But my wife or children falls down the stairs, is the university responsible for that? Or are we going to be held harmless through either an insurance policy or a statement that indicates that we are not liable, we meaning the university and the system is not liable for any actions taken by the spouse, the children, et cetera. So we cannot be sued, so to speak, by the mate or by the children as we move down the line. They must have something like that at the other universities, I would imagine.
Yeah, so we did check with UConn to see what policies and procedures they had in place as another state agency. Ernestine, our general counsel, has done a thorough review of this to make sure that the liability aspects that you just mentioned are covered. You know, as it relates to the pet part of this, you know, we do reserve the right to require renter's insurance and liability insurance of the employee should the dog or the pet bite someone, you know, and have the ability to have that addressed. The liability for the university based on the legal analysis is very low, especially as it relates to a dog potentially biting someone. In terms of, you know, the insurance that's required, we did reach back to the universities. Ben's office did a lot of work on this as well. And the position was that the risk to the universities was very low based on the totality of the circumstances. You know, that the resident, you know, the university, the spouse or the partner or the dependent children are not accessing areas of the residence hall that are not open to the public. So generally they would be in the apartment of the university housing employee, you know, traversing the parking lots or the parking garage, but not in areas that are open to the you know, privately to students that are registered at that university. And also we are requiring background checks as, you know, as allowed by law to make sure that we're, you know, doing some additional things to ensure that we have a, you know, a safe and secure residence hall for everybody involved.
So we are basically held harmless as far as a child falling down the steps that doesn't really belong there, that they, meaning the director, will be responsible. They will have insurance to take care of it. They can't sue the university because there was water on the steps. The child was sliding down a banister and fell over, broke a leg, that kind of thing. That really bothers me to an extent that, you know, I have no problem with this. I think it's a great idea. But I want to make sure we have enough issues financially without having to add to the burden of having to be responsible for those kinds of things, Angela.
No, and I understand that. You know, if this is a public area of the campus, I don't think it's any different than a community member or somebody from the public accessing the campus and then, you know, filing suit, whether through the claims commission or through an attorney. But, you know, I don't think there's zero liability, but the liability level is very minimal based on the analysis that I received and the research that was done. I mean, nothing is 100% sure, as we know. I mean, of course, someone can file a lawsuit. Whether or not it's successful is a different story.
Thank you.
Obviously, we need to maintain these facilities safe for the, you know, the dozens of 19-year-olds who live there now. 19 being the age of reason, as we all know. So it's hard to imagine that the addition of one or two additional folks is going to change the outlook. We need to maintain, you know, we need to keep the stairways safe. We need to keep the handrails on, you know, intact, et cetera, so that if there's any, you know, I think that the legal standard for our liability is the same legal standard that any landlord has. And we already are required to meet those standards in order to serve the students who are living there. So I don't think it puts any new burden on us, and the incremental risk of having one other person live there who might sue us is very small compared to the potential benefit of being able to you know, provide this.
I'm assuming that we are going to take a look at what other colleges and universities do in this situation and how they protect themselves. So we're not just going into this blindly. We're going to take a look.
Oh yeah, no, and like renter's insurance and requiring insurance.
Right.
Yeah, and just to, and the universities were made aware to check their individual CSU insurance policies to just make sure that there's coverage or to add coverage if they needed to. But I should also note that dependents of the university employee are currently allowed to live on campus if they're a child of that staff member. So, this policy has been in effect for many years, and having lived on a university campus at Western, at Eastern, I'm not aware of any issues with dependents or children of current staff members that currently reside there. So hopefully this will be a continuation of that.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, my question is not so much about what you've been talking about, namely individuals other than students living during the fall and spring terms. But during the summer term, we use the residences as residents for temporary residents for conferences, and that might be for 2 or 3 days or perhaps even a week. Obviously, these regulations couldn't apply. For example, background checks. Before occupancy in a university residence may commence, each proposed resident age 18 or over shall submit to a background check. Now, we can't do that. Sorry. We can't, that's obviously not something we don't want to do when we're bringing in somebody for, say, I've done it twice at Central, the Bertrand Russell conference, and we have 30, 40, sometimes 50 people who come in from across the United States, Canada, and even around the world. So it seems to me that this should be amended to make explicit the fact that it is covering the fall and spring terms, but not the summer use of residences for conferences and other academic meetings. Otherwise, this would put impossible obstacles to something which is actually revenue generating.
Yeah, we had discussed that. Thank you for that point, David. Some of our universities are doing background checks for their summer conferences. Whether it's the summer or the fall or the spring, we still need to make sure that the occupancy of the residence halls is being, people that are residing there, whether for 1 week or 2 weeks, that there's not any health or safety threats to the campus or the community, especially because our campuses are open year round. But there is some flexibility for the university leadership to decide who's doing the background checks or when they're required. Specifically, the background checks are required for those employees and their spouses. So the employee, their spouse will go, as long as they're over 18, and obviously hopefully they would go through the same background check that the employee goes through. The same with the dependent children, as long as they're 18 years of age. But it also gives the university the ability to do additional background checks, which some of your counterparts are actually doing. And I do understand that some of them are not for some of these summer conferences. So we are going to, continue to give the flexibility there, but we do need to still protect the university in the summer as well as the fall and spring semesters.
Well, I've attended conferences at least a dozen universities across the United States and Canada, and then no one ever does a background check on people who are coming Friday afternoon and staying till Sunday noon for a conference of the English department or something like that. This will in fact place an significant impediment to the holding of such conferences. And as I pointed out, these are revenue makers. If I bring in 40 people and charge them each $45 a night, you do the calculation for 3 nights, the revenue that the university would lose. Moreover, there is the academic prestige and significance of holding these kinds of conferences. If I were a voting member of this committee, I would right now move an amendment to that resolution to accept summer occupancy for short-term periods of less than a week of academic conferences as approved by the university. I'm not a voting member of this committee. I think you're making a mistake by putting this resolution through without that exception. Even if in one university they start doing this, no faculty member, let me assure you, no faculty member will hold a conference where people coming from around the world would have to go through background checks. So let me just reiterate my point and hope that you will take this under advisement and come up with a separate policy. Otherwise, what we're doing is retarding academic activities and also reducing revenues. We just talked about the need to increase revenues.
If I could interject for a moment, Professor Blitz, I disagree with your interpretation of the matter before you. The policy which has been proposed includes the language that says non-university personnel and guests of the university may be subject to background checks as deemed appropriate by university leadership. I think that it is, I have confidence in the leadership of our universities to apply this in a way that is appropriate. I completely agree that a group of visiting faculty for a long weekend conference is a very different standard than if you're inviting a visiting lecturer to reside in a dormitory for 3 months during a spring semester. Well, frankly, you're paying them as a professor. And so you would be conducting a background check before you offered them employment. So I think in this case that the policy allows for plenty of room for, well-informed judgment by the leadership of each campus. It allows for the imposition of background checks when they're appropriate, but does not require them. This also clarifies that we included language that clarifies and allows, under this policy, the universities to use their available dormitory space more than they currently do. So several times we've heard questions from, like the example is Western, where they have a theater program that brings in visiting professors from New York. And so the Danbury labor market housing market is very tight. The desire of a visiting faculty member who are probably not paying as much as they would like to go and find temporary housing for 3 months is an obstacle to their being able to participate in the programs. This would clarify the occasional practice and make more permanent that they can offer available dormitory space to visiting faculty members, temporarily in order to support their academic programs. So I think that this clearly gives them more ability to use those dormitories for, whether it's conferences or summer programs or supportive academic programs during the semester, all of which we think are good uses of available dorm space, especially now that we have low occupancy and more availability. So this gives, we're hopeful that this policy will give the universities increased flexibility to utilize their available dormitory space to benefit the university.
Well, I'd like what you just said to be explicit in the resolution and in the staff report.
Yeah, if I can just add, Ben, the procedures that the universities are going to develop that will be reviewed by legal will delineate what they'll require for background checks. I mean, I think as you pointed out, and I hope that I mentioned, it may require background checks. It was specifically written in the policy this way to give flexibility, because it's not just academic conferences. We have Boys and Girls State. We have other longer type conferences and activities at the universities that span, 5 days a week, 2 weeks, the entire summer. So again, the university leadership, from the presidents to the vice presidents of student affairs to the directors of housing, have seen this policy, have provided feedback and agreed upon the language that was used. And I think that, would appreciate the flexibility to determine when the background checks are appropriate and when.
But you use the word shall in that section.
No, I'm looking at section I, sub D on page 45 is the pertinent language, 45 of the agenda, Professor Blitz. That language is very clear that it says may and ascribes it to the deemed appropriate by university leadership. So I believe that the policy directly supports the position you've recommended.
We'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
For what it's worth, Ben, I think given the universities the capability to make their decisions best for their university and be flexible with the different environments that may and situations that may arise is really smart. So I'm supportive of the may language.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I was concerned with your concern, David, but I think it's pretty clear now that we're taking care of it. And Angela, sounds like they're going to be taking another look at everything anyway, again, for any additions or deletions. So now I'm comfortable. I wasn't initially when you made your comments, but I feel much better now about the may comment on page 45 and the specific kinds of individuals that may be required to have a background check. And it protects, I think, what you said, income financially, and also programs that will be held during the summer and maybe even in the fall or winter sessions when students aren't there. So I'm comfortable with that right now, though. Thank you.
Chair Balducci, can I ask a quick question, and Ben, maybe you know the answer to it? under they're on the further down, apologize, I've now lost it. There was a place down below where I think it does, under university residential life professional staff, it does require the background check, but that's separate from the non-university personnel and guests of the university. So I just want to, maybe that's why there was some confusion, but on page 46, 2B, Roman numeral 2, subsection B, but that's really linked to university residential life professional staff must have the background checks.
Yes, and that's a current requirement of the policy.
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
Yep.
That's pretty clear.
Yeah, I agree with your read on that.
Yep,
Very much.
well done, thanks. That's good, makes everything even clearer. Any other comments? Then I'd make a motion to adopt this resolution. Is there a second? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution's adopted. Thank you. The last action item we have before us is a gift from Trax Machine Tools. And who's going to handle that, Keith? Or
I'll let Keith do it because he knows what the gift is.
that's a good thing, Keith.
It is, yeah. It's a good thing for CT State, their advanced manufacturing program. So Richard and Marion Leonhardt, who reside in California, and Mr. Leonhardt is also the retired president of Track Equipment, which is in California, has an ongoing relationship with our advanced manufacturing program. Last year, as recent as last year, they donated $250,000 worth of equipment to our programs. This year, they offered to donate 2 pieces of equipment, a lathe and a milling machine, for Tunxus's new advanced manufacturing program at Spring Lane in Farmington. And the equipment is valued at $104,000, and we're asking for the board to approve that donation.
Thank you, Keith. Any comments by members, David or Ari? Wow, this is easy. Okay.
If I could just express my gratitude and support for the university for continuing these relationships. And we talk a lot about driving enrollment and the impact we can have on lives. You know, it's our ability to give people opportunity for real world training and education that helps us do that. And these types of donations put us in a great position to stand out and drive that kind of value without having to use our precious, scarce resources. So just a kudos to the people that are involved in developing and maintaining these relationships. I could not possibly be more supportive.
Thank you. Thanks, Ari. A motion to adopt the resolution for the gift by Trax Machine Tools. Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution's adopted. Thank you very much. Is there any other further business to come before the committee? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion for adjournment. I would make the motion. Is there a second?
Oh, I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion, none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Live streams